In this short video, I want to look at an important phrase for people looking to build long-term wealth, lifetime saving. I want to point out some of the ways of achieving it and some of the pitfalls along the way. So with no more ado, why do we save? What's our objective? Well, there are quite a few reasons. One is to cover off rainy days. We might need to fix a hole in the roof. We might need to suddenly come up with money if we suffer short-term redundancy or whatever it happens to be, ill health, number of reasons why we need that rainy day fund. We want to also fund big future purchases. There will come a point in time where we need that house deposit, where we need to pay a little bit later on in life for a wedding, for example, new car, whatever it happens to be. There's a sense of security, and that comes with having a little bit tucked aside. And of course, a crucial one is increasingly we're all having to pay for our own retirements as the government cut back on the state pension and as companies cut back on final salary schemes. More and more of us have got to look to fund our own retirements, and those retirements could last some time. So that's kind of the challenge. Now, let's look at some hypothetical examples. If you're 40 today, what is your time horizon? So classically, sort of middle age. Your time horizon needs to still be pretty long, let alone if you're younger. You could be living to 90 plus. Girls born today, on some estimates, will live to 100 on average. And you could be working until 70 plus. One solution to how am I going to fund retirement is, of course, to defer it. So our time horizons need to adapt to the fact we're all living longer and we're being kept alive for longer. Now, the problem is this: at current annuity rates, if you're 65 years old, and some people might think they want to retire before that, but let's leave it till 65. At current annuity rates, that's where you swap a lump of cash for an income stream, or £1 million will only buy you, depending on the assumptions you make, around £40,000 of income. So even a £1 million savings pot doesn't buy fabulous wealth in retirement, and if you start to reduce the size of that pot and or reduce your retirement age, the picture gets worse. So you can see the scale of the challenge we're increasingly up against. So how are we going to solve it? The solution isn't cash. It's tempting when markets are volatile. It's tempting if you think the market could be about to dip, to run into cash. And as a short-term home for some of your wealth, cash has its place. But the problem is it is eroded by inflation, and we'll take a look at that in just a moment. All right. What we'll do to just illustrate how cash is eroded by inflation and why taking a little bit of risk and investing in stocks and shares is a valid alternative provided you manage the risk correctly. I'm going to take an example. Imagine an 83-year-old living today who invested quite a sum, £25,000, nice round lump sum, quite a big sum in 1972 when they would have been about 40 years old. Now, going to assume they went 100% into stocks and shares, but I'll do a comparison of what would have happened if they stayed 100% in cash alongside, just to make the point. Now, why have I picked 1972? Well, what we're going to do is to go in at the start of one of the worst bear markets we've seen in recent stock market history. So a really appalling time to go into the market, but would you still have done it with the benefit of hindsight? And that's really the key message coming up. So 1971 to 1974, investing in stocks doesn't look very clever. All right, there's the £25,000 going in at the start, and only 3 years later, that had been reduced to just £8,600, or what, a third of what you'd invested, not looking terribly clever. And plenty of people might have sort of panic sold or bailed out there. Big mistake. Someone in cash, and this is non-inflation adjusted, is sitting pretty smugly thinking, well, I've still got, ignoring inflation, my £25,000 in cash. All right, but that is just one relatively short period in the stock market's history. Let's widen the picture out now. This is the FTSE All-Share versus cash over a much longer period, coming right up to the present day off the end of that graph. And basically, what you see is there's the bear market, there it is, a sort of distant memory. By about there, sort of 77 or so, the stock market already recovered, and then it went on to leave you way ahead of cash. Now, ignoring inflation, we can factor that in a moment, but this line at the bottom shows the £25,000 of cash, just stays at £25,000, and meanwhile, you're up to the best part of £500,000 off a base investment at £25,000, having hung on in there and ridden out some fairly big dips in the meantime, admittedly. But the point is, you didn't panic sell back here, you You didn't panic sell here, and you didn't panic sell there either. And your overall savings pot substantially larger thanks to stocks and shares, and this is not even including income in the picture than pure cash. Now, some people will say, well, that's sort of comparing on a certain basis to make a point. So let's move things around a bit. Let's do an inflation-adjusted comparison. So here we go this time. What I've done is to adjust both the FTSE All-Share return and the cash return for the RPI, so Retail Prices Index, old measure of inflation. So we start at £25,000 on both bases, and sure enough, the share line's a bit wobbly, but look where we end up. Cash is gradually destroyed by inflation. It's very hard, to beat inflation in terms of the return you earn from cash. So 25,000 becomes around 2, call it 2K, winding forward for the effect of inflation. So your purchasing power, what you can actually buy, bearing in mind over this period the cost of things rises, with your money is only £2,000. Whereas in shares, all right, you get a number, get around a little bit of just shy of 40k. We'll call it 38k. All right, and that's a huge difference in purchasing power. In other words, your capital has not only been preserved, as it hasn't been in cash, it's been increased, and it's been increased significantly. So that the gap between what you can actually buy at the end is much, much greater than a lot of people think because of the impact that inflation has on cash. Now, we can look at a total return basis, because some people might say, what about dividends? All right, well, good point, okay? Shares do pay dividends, and reinvested, they're incredibly powerful. So if you compare, now we start again at the same place, the £25,000 investment back there, on a total return basis, that means you're earning interest on cash. Now, I've used Barclays Gilt Equity Study 2015 figures here. The cash deposit climbs to a respectable, well, nearly £400,000. There were some quite good periods of interest rates in there because inflation also went up. But look at what's happened to shares on a total return basis, is including dividends, rolling up dividends, not spending them. You're up to around 2.7 million. And again, a substantial gap. And were you to inflation adjust both numbers, you'd still have a decent gap between the two, by the way. So, what do we conclude from all of this? Two things, first of all. To minimise the risk that you get stock market investment wrong. I mean, you can see the benefits of it potentially, but what about getting it wrong? Because people do get it wrong, and then they sort of disappear from the stock market and never seen again. First of all, how do I invest and how much do I invest? You need a rainy day fund. 3 to 6 months of salary tucked away just in case. Emergency money, that needs to be liquid and accessible. So cash is a good place for that. Then think about foreseeable calls on capital. Things that you might need cash for within the next 5 to 7 years. So, the wedding, for example, you're paying for your kids, for argument's sake, repaying an interest-only mortgage, coming up with the lump sum you need for that. The deposit, if you're lucky enough to do it for a second property, whatever it happens to be. Think about when those are going to arise and make sure you have the balance between cash and equities right. I'm just summarising here. And then make sure that most of the rest of your capital is in shares, unless you are confident enough to be some kind of buy-to-let landlord and can deal with the hassle and the headaches and the cost of doing that. And most of us, particularly as you get older, don't want to. Shares are the place to go. And I'm suggesting that even if you went in at what is arguably, with the benefit of hindsight, a terrible point, you still would have come out okay in shares. Okay, conclusions. The key one is this. What fundamentally matters is time in the market, not timing the market. Shares can be your friend over the long term as a lifetime savings vehicle, provided you let compounding do its work, you don't panic sell, and you plan so you're never a forced seller. So there you have it, a lifetime savings suggestion and a way of managing some of the bigger risks.